I'm not giving up my seat no matter who you are. Cynthia Harper's voice cut through the first-class cabin of Aurora Air Flight AU219 like a blade through still air. The champagne glass in her hand trembled slightly, its golden liquid catching the cabin light. The entire section froze. Every eye turned toward the two passengers facing each other, a white woman in an expensive business dress and a poised black man clutching his boarding pass. Daniel Carter stood still beneath the soft white light spilling from the ceiling, his expression calm and composed, like the surface of a lake before a storm. "I'm sorry," he said evenly, "but this is my seat, 2A. His tone was steady, but in his eyes there was an ocean of restrained endurance. Cynthia flipped through her fashion magazine without looking up. "I sat here first." 4 words, light as air, yet heavy with entitlement. Around them, whispers spread like fire through dry grass. A couple exchanged glances, trying not to stare. A businessman, halfway through opening his laptop, paused, glancing over the rim of his glasses. In a cabin designed to avoid confrontation, a collision had begun, one made of status color and prejudice. Daniel drew a slow breath. He knew that look too well, the silent question in people's eyes that asked, "Are you sure you belong here?" All he wanted was to sit quietly in seat 2, open his laptop, and prepare for the upcoming meeting in San Francisco. But life, once again, had chosen a different way to test him. 20 minutes earlier, at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, Daniel had walked through the terminal with the composed air of a man who had learned to move quietly through a loud world. He wore a simple navy blue suit, carried a leather briefcase worn smooth at the edges, and rolled a scuffed travel bag he'd used for over a decade. No one in the crowd realized he was the chairman and CEO of Aurora Air, the very airline operating the flight they were about to board. He liked it that way. Anonymity gave him an honest view of how people behaved when they believed you had no power. At the boarding counter, Ryan Blake, a young employee, greeted him with a practiced smile. "Good morning, sir. May I see your ticket?" He scanned the barcode, his eyes pausing at the line that read, "First class, seat 2A. The smile faltered. "Mr. Carter, first class. One moment, please." Ryan stared at the screen a bit too long, double-checking the data more times than necessary. "Is there a problem?" Daniel asked quietly. No, sir. The system's just slow," Ryan replied. But when he finally printed the boarding pass, his eyes lingered on Daniel's face, a moment too long, filled with hesitation and doubt. It was a look Daniel had seen all his life in boardrooms, restaurants and airports where success was often assumed to have only one skin color. He moved on through security, where the TSA officer took a few extra seconds for a random verification. At the gate, he chose a quiet corner seat, opened his laptop and reviewed quarterly reports. Across the lounge, first class, passengers laughed freely, sipping coffee in comfort. An invisible line split the space in 2, their ease on one side, his vigilance on the other. When boarding began, Daniel stepped forward with the priority group. He caught the shift in the gate agent's eyes, a smile still in place, but the warmth behind it gone. He returned the smile anyway and walked down the jet bridge. The cabin of Aurora AU219 carried the scent of new leather and sandalwood. Lauren Pierce, the chief flight attendant, greeted each passenger with professional charm. "Welcome aboard." But when Daniel stepped in, her smile wavered just for a heartbeat enough for a man of his experience to notice. He nodded politely and walked toward seat 2A. Except when he arrived, someone was already there. Cynthia Harper, 43-years-old marketing director of a luxury cosmetics brand, sat with her legs crossed flipping through Vogue. Her Prada handbag occupied the armrest, a glass of champagne sparkling beside her. "Excuse me, this is my seat," Daniel said, calmly showing his boarding pass. Cynthia glanced up for half a second, then back to her magazine. "I sat here first." The words carried more than defiance, they carried expectation. Lauren noticed the exchange and approached her tone, gentle, but her gaze firm. "May I see your ticket?" Sir Daniel handed it to her. She studied it carefully, frowned slightly, then turned to Cynthia. "Mrs. Harper, your ticket says 3B correct." Cynthia shrugged. "The system must be wrong. I've flown this airline for 20 years and I've never had a seating issue." Lauren turned back to Daniel, lowering her voice. "I'll need to verify your information. Please wait just a moment." The entire cabin fell silent, a heavy, judging silence. Daniel stood between the rows of leather seats, feeling the spotlight of suspicion press against him. He could hear the whispers. "Maybe he's in the wrong section," one voice murmured. Another responded, "No, he looks like the system glitched." Daniel swallowed the surge of frustration rising in his chest, not because he was weak, but because he was exhausted from having to prove the obvious over and over again. He kept his voice level. "There's no system error. I bought this ticket. This seat belongs to me." Cynthia finally looked up, her lips curling into a razor-thin smile. "My dear, I think you're making this bigger than it needs to be." Lauren exhaled softly, glancing around the cabin. She could feel the weight of the passengers' stares, of her crew's hesitation, and of her own uneasy conscience. Somewhere deep down, she realized she, too, had, without meaning to, placed this man into a familiar box. Guilt pricked at her, but fear of conflict held her still. Daniel looked around, saw no one willing to speak up. Only silence, complicit, suffocating silence. He tightened his grip on the boarding pass. In his mind, memories flashed countless flights where he had been randomly checked, accidentally reassigned, or silently judged as an intruder in places his success had earned him the right to be. But this time was different. This time he was done being silent. Cynthia took another sip of champagne, her eyes drifting toward the window, indifferent. Daniel said nothing more. Only one thought echoed in his mind, clear and unwavering, like the engine rumbling before takeoff. "If they want to know who I am, they're about to find out." "Let me see your ticket again." Lauren Pierce's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of small authority that ruled enclosed spaces. She extended her hand, her gesture sharp and commanding, stripped of the warmth she'd shown earlier, as the smiling chief flight attendant. Daniel Carter handed her the boarding pass. His eyes remained calm, but inside him, anger simmered like molten lava beneath a crust of control. He had stood in this place too many times before, not on this exact flight, but inside this same kind of treatment. Lauren held the ticket under the cabin light, her eyes darting over each line as if hoping to find something that proved him wrong. Around them, passengers began to stare. Whispers rippled through the air like a live wire. "What's going on?" someone murmured. "Looks like he's in the wrong seat," another voice followed. "No, just look at him." A familiar shame rose in Daniel's throat, an old ache that never stopped stinging. Lauren handed the ticket back, her tone tight. "Mr. Carter, our system hasn't verified your payment yet." "May I ask how you purchased your ticket?" Daniel frowned slightly. "On the Aurora Air website, like any other passenger." "With a credit card, correct?" "Yes." "Then may I see that card, please?" The request landed like an ice cube in a glass of water, cold and jarring. Daniel paused for a moment, then reached into his wallet and handed over a gleaming platinum card. Lauren took it, turning it over in her hand, her gaze investigative, as though holding evidence in a criminal case. From seat 1, B. Peter Langford, a silver-haired man in a designer suit, turned slightly and spoke in a tone coated with polite condescension. It's probably just a system glitch. But sometimes cases like this do happen. The phrase "cases like this" hung in the air clear enough that everyone knew exactly what he meant. Lauren nodded, then walked briskly toward the crew cabin. Cynthia Harper leaned toward Daniel, her voice dripping with poisonous sweetness. "You know, I've flown this airline for 20 years. Never seen anything like this." "I'm sure they just need to double-check," Daniel replied quietly, his patience now drained from his eyes. Double-check or judge, eh? Few minutes later, Lauren returned with a young male attendant beside her, Mike Dalton, whose entire posture screamed troublemaker. "Mr. Carter." Mike said coldly, "We still can't verify your transaction. Please step aside while we sort this out." "Step aside," Daniel repeated. "I'm standing next to the seat that was assigned to me." "As you can see," Lauren interjected, "someone is currently sitting in that seat." Cynthia took another sip of champagne and smiled faintly. Daniel locked eyes with Lauren. "And that someone doesn't have a valid ticket." "So tell me who exactly should be moving." Lauren sighed, keeping her tone measured. "Mr. Carter, we're just following procedure." "What procedure?" "Security verification." Daniel let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Security or prejudice? The air in the cabin grew heavy, thick enough to choke on. Several passengers subtly lifted their phones, pretending to text while actually recording. A few soft tisk sounds broke the silence like invisible verdicts. The cockpit door swung open. Captain Thomas Avery stepped out, a tall man with silver hair and a face shaped by years of command. "What seems to be the issue here?" Lauren quickly summarized her version, trimmed to cast herself in the best light. Avery turned toward Daniel, authority radiating from his stance. "Sir, my crew has a concern regarding your ticket. Until we can confirm it, I'll have to ask you to take a temporary seat in economy class." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Cynthia smiled with satisfaction. Peter nodded approvingly, as if justice had been restored. Daniel inhaled deeply, his voice calm but unwavering. "Captain, I've paid in full. I have a confirmed ticket, and I've done nothing wrong. I will not leave the seat I purchased." Avery's tone hardened. "Failure to comply with the crew's instructions is a federal offense. Would you prefer we call security?" The words hit like a slap in front of everyone. Daniel felt the weight of every gaze turned toward him, fearful, judgmental, and a few disturbingly entertained. From seat 1, Boambe Peter added smoothly, "He seems agitated, Captain. Perhaps security should check him out." Cynthia nodded quickly, her voice trembling with feigned concern. "Yes, I don't feel safe with him here." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment. His heartbeat thundered not with fear, but with a mix of fury and sorrow. He'd sat through hundreds of board meetings with executives who preached about inclusion and diversity. Yet here in the first-class cabin of the very airline, he led the truth stood naked before him. Those slogans had never reached the human heart. He opened his eyes, staring directly at Avery. "Captain, do you know what you're doing right now?" Avery's voice was cold. "I'm ensuring the safety of this flight." "No," Daniel said slowly, each word cutting through the air like a blade. "You're ensuring the safety of your own prejudice. Lauren stepped forward, trying to intervene. "Sir, please lower your voice. We're only trying to handle this smoothly." Smoothly for whom, Daniel asked. For the person sitting in the wrong seat, or for the one being judged because of his skin color? Silence spread like fog, dense, suffocating. No one spoke. No one stood beside him. Captain Avery lifted the intercom phone, speaking sharply into it, requesting security assistance at seat 2A immediately. Daniel looked around the cabin, faces turning away, eyes dropping to phones or windows. Not a single person said, "He's right." Not one said, "She's wrong." Something inside Daniel cracked. Not his pride, but his faith in the simplest fairness between human beings. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb typed swiftly, just a few short lines, Olivia AU 219. Severe discrimination situation. Intervene now. Sent. The screen lit up, delivered. Daniel lifted his gaze, meeting Avery's eyes as the captain gestured for security. Captain Daniel said quietly, "You have no idea who you're talking to." And in that moment, the invisible bridge between power and justice began to tremble. Cynthia's hand tightened around her champagne glass, her palm suddenly cold. Lauren glanced nervously at Mike, her heartbeat quickening. None of them knew the message just sent would change the fate of the entire airline. The intercom crackled to life, Captain Thomas Avery's tense voice filling the cabin, requesting immediate security assistance in first class. "We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." Within minutes, 2 security officers stepped in from the jet bridge. Miguel Ramirez, a composed Latin man in his 40s, moved with calm authority. Beside him was Dana Brooks, a young black officer whose sharp eyes and steady face reflected the calm before a storm. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. The whispers stopped. Only the low hum of the air conditioning and the pounding hearts of those waiting for the next scene remained. Avery quickly stepped forward, his tone rushing to frame the story before anyone else could. "Officers, this passenger," he pointed directly at Daniel, "has refused to move, disrupted the crew's operations, and delayed the flight." Miguel gave a small nod and turned to Daniel. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" Before Daniel could answer, Cynthia Harper jumped in her voice, trembling with a performance of fear. "I was terrified. He became aggressive when asked to leave the seat. I just want to have a peaceful flight." The word aggressive sliced through the cabin like an arrow aimed straight at Daniel. From seat 1, B. Peter Langford chimed in, eager to play the role of a witness. "I can confirm that." He seemed quite agitated. "I don't want to speculate, but perhaps there's some issue with his ticket." The word issue sounded like a verdict handed down without a trial. Daniel looked around. Lauren Pierce, the chief flight attendant, stood behind the captain, hands tightly clasped. Mike Dalton stared at the floor, avoiding Daniel's eyes. The other passengers sat still, shrinking into their seats, desperate not to be part of it. Daniel took a deep breath. "I purchased this ticket I'm sitting in. The correct seat. I've been questioned, asked for my card, told to prove myself only because I'm black. And now I'm being treated like a criminal." Miguel hesitated slightly, but Cynthia's voice rose again, sharp and defensive. "No one mentioned your skin color. But your behavior, it's clearly inappropriate for a normal passenger." Daniel turned his gaze toward her eyes like steel. "And what exactly does a normal passenger look like, Mrs. Harper? Someone like you." The air thickened. The entire cabin felt pulled into the space between them. Dana Brooks stepped forward, her tone soft but firm. "Mr. Carter, we just want to make sure everything is safe. Could you please provide some identification?" Daniel opened his wallet and handed over his driver's license, his employee ID, and a business card engraved with the Aurora Air logo. Dinah glanced at them, her expression flickering with doubt not toward Daniel, but toward how this situation had been handled. Meanwhile, Avery raised his voice, sharp with impatience. "Officer Brooks, Officer Ramirez, we can't delay this flight any longer. If this passenger refuses to cooperate, I suggest removing him immediately." Miguel looked at his partner, then turned back to the captain. "Sir, we haven't established any violation. Let me speak with him privately." Avery snapped. "I don't have time to talk." At that moment, Daniel's phone vibrated. On the screen, Olivia Bennett, Director of Operations Aurora Air. He answered quietly. "Olivia, it's worse than I thought." Her voice came firm and controlled. "You're on flight AU 219, right? I got your message. Don't say another word. I'll handle it." Daniel looked straight at the captain, his tone calm, almost eerily composed. "Captain, I suggest you prepare for a very important call." Avery gave a cold laugh. "Are you threatening me, sir?" "No," Daniel replied. "Just informing you." Less than 2 minutes later, the captain's intercom rang sharply. Lauren jumped, and Cynthia nearly spilled her champagne. Avery picked up the receiver, trying to maintain his authority. "This is Captain Avery." A woman's voice came through crisp and icy, cutting through the air like a blade. "Captain Avery, this is Olivia Bennett, Director of Operations for Aurora Air. I understand you're having an issue with a passenger named Daniel Carter." Avery froze. "Yes, ma'am, the passenger is refusing crew instructions," Captain Olivia interrupted. "Do you even know who you're talking about?" The silence that followed was absolute. Avery looked around and saw Daniel standing, his eyes fixed on him. "Ma'am," he said, that he, Olivia emphasized, is the chairman and CEO of Aurora Air, the man who approved the very budget for the team you command, the man who signed the procedures you are now abusing to humiliate him." Lauren dropped her clipboard. Mike stood frozen. Cynthia's mouth fell open as her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Peter stammered, He's... Avery's face went pale. His hands trembled as he clutched the phone. "I didn't know, Mom." Not knowing, Olivia said slowly, is never an excuse. You've just proven that your prejudice outweighs your professionalism. Remember this, Captain. This flight isn't just delayed. It has just shaken an entire airline. Avery looked at Daniel, lips dry and trembling. "Mr. Carter, Daniel raised a hand to stop him. "Don't. Hear me first." He turned toward the cabin where every face was now painted with panic and shame. His voice carried through the silence, low, steady, unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Daniel Carter, CEO of Aurora Air. And for the past 45 minutes, I have witnessed how dignity can be stripped away from a person with nothing more than a suspicious glance and procedures disguised as protocol. I don't need your pity. I need your awareness." No one spoke. Lauren finally found her voice. "Sir, I'm so sorry." "No," Daniel said. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry because you found out who I am." Cynthia stood her face, pale. "I didn't know. I just thought. You thought I didn't belong here." Daniel interrupted, his tone cold. And that is exactly the problem. The silence pressed down so hard, it felt alive. Dana Brooks, the young security officer, was the first to break it. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of airport security, I apologize. You were treated unfairly." Daniel nodded. "No, officer, you did your job. But thank you for saying that." He turned, walked calmly back to seat 2A and sat down. The entire cabin held its breath. Cynthia backed against the wall, tears welling in her eyes. Peter lowered his phone, the secret recording in his hands, now a weight of guilt. Lauren stood, frozen, her lips trembling. Captain Avery still held the receiver, a man suddenly lost in the sky he once controlled. Daniel opened his laptop. The glow of the screen lit his face. Calm, resolute, needing no raised voice to command silence, only truth to expose it. He spoke quietly, but everyone heard. Captain Avery, within 15 minutes, you'll receive another call. Not to talk, to end this. The first-class cabin fell into absolute stillness. At 30,000 feet, a storm called truth had just begun to form. No one said a word. The air in first class was so heavy, you could hear the halting breaths of people realizing they had been wrong. Cynthia Harper's champagne glass still lay shattered on the floor, the gold liquid spreading in a long streak that reflected the cold white lights. Daniel Carter sat motionless in seat 2A, his seat. At last, he closed his laptop, laced his fingers, and let his gaze move slowly across every face in the cabin. He did not need to shout. He did not need to threaten. His silence was the real power, Mr. Carter Captain Thomas Avery spoke first, his voice trembling as if he had swallowed the very drink spilled on the floor. I sincerely apologize. What happened was a misunderstanding. Daniel cut him off, his voice, low and firm without rising. No, Captain, it was not a misunderstanding. It is a system run on assumptions and bias, and you just showed me exactly how it works. Avery opened his mouth, but no words came. Lauren Pierce, the chief flight attendant, still stood nearby with her hands clasped so tightly they looked bloodless. Daniel turned to her. Have you ever asked a white passenger to prove a payment card after they cleared security and boarded? Lauren bowed her head. No, sir. Then why today? She swallowed. Because a passenger said the seat was taken. I only wanted to verify. Daniel held her gaze. No, you wanted me to prove I was worthy. A thick silence poured through the cabin until it was hard to breathe. From seat 1B, Peter Langford attempted a brittle smile. Mr. Carter, I believe everyone here simply misread the situation. I meant no offense. Daniel turned his eyes, slicing through the layers of excuse. You filmed me while I was being humiliated. Did you not? Peter flushed and stammered. I only recorded in case we needed evidence. Evidence of what Daniel asked. That a black man cannot remain calm when treated unjustly. Peter stared at his shoes. Cynthia Harper stood, pressed against the paneling, her face white as paper. Daniel looked at her without anger. Now only disappointment. Mrs. Harper, what made you think you had the right to sit in seat 2? A, when your ticket clearly says 3. B, Cynthia's voice shook. I thought they made a mistake. I am used to the front row. I have flown this airline for many years. I did not know. You did not know, Daniel repeated. Did not know or did not care. Was it because you believed someone who looks like me could not have purchased first class? Tears began to slide down Cynthia's cheeks. I was wrong. I am sorry. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then spoke, cool as water. No, you are only sorry because now you know who I am. If I were just another passenger, you would not change your attitude. Lauren's breath caught and her shoulders shook. Avery stepped back until his spine met the wall. Daniel opened his laptop and tapped a few keys. The blue light sharpened his features, decisive and cold. He placed a video call. Marcus, a deep male voice, answered, I am here. Dan, prepare disciplinary files, issue termination, notices to Captain Thomas Avery and flight attendants Lauren Pierce and Mike Dalton grounds our discriminatory conduct and violation of our professional ethics policy. Lauren broke into tears. "Mr. Carter, please, give me a chance." Daniel did not look up from the screen. "A chance like the one I was just stripped of in the very seat I paid for." "No, Ms. Pierce. Chances are for those who recognize their mistakes before they are exposed." He switched to email and typed, "To customer service, revoke all Diamond tier privileges of passengers. Cynthia Harper and Peter Langford suspend flying rights for 2 years on Aurora Air and partner carriers." He pressed. Send a dry ping sounded a small noise that to those in the cabin fell like a gavel on fate. Cynthia sobbed, "Mr. Carter, please. I did not mean." Daniel looked at her. The anger gone, only gravity remaining. "Mrs. Harper, what disappoints me is not that you took my seat. It is that for the past 45 minutes you chose silence while injustice unfolded because it was not happening to you. No one dared draw a deep breath. The air congealed into shame and quiet. Officer Dana Brooks, the only one who had kept steady professional composure, stepped forward and spoke gently. "Carter, by regulation, we still need to file an incident report. Would you like to do it now or after landing?" Daniel gave a faint smile. "The first of the day, after landing, Officer Brooks. And thank you for your professionalism. I will note it." Dana nodded and stepped back. Her colleague Miguel let out a careful breath. He had seen many conflicts, but had never watched an entire power structure laid bare by nothing more than calm resolve. People returned to their seats in silence. The flight had still not departed, nearly 2 hours late. The aircraft finally began to taxi. No one spoke. No one dared meet Daniel's eyes. He looked out the window where sunset washed the runway in amber. In the reflection, his face was not only that of a powerful chief executive, it was the face of a man carrying the memory of generations judged and forced to prove they deserved to exist in spaces others believed they owned. A thread of loneliness moved through him, not the loneliness of insult, but the loneliness of someone who sees the truth too clearly. He thought of ordinary passengers, people who would never receive a call from a director of operations, who would never have the power to demand justice in first class. If he had not been Daniel Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Air, he would have been reduced to a brief line, a disruptive passenger removed from a flight. He closed his eyes. A decision took shape, clear as light, cutting through cloud. Tomorrow everything would change, not only for him, but for everyone who had been forced to bow their heads in silence. The plane tilted its wings and lifted off the runway into a sky sliding into night. Inside the cabin, everyone stayed wordless. Lauren's quiet sobs shivered in the air. Mike kept his eyes down. Cynthia covered her face, and Peter stared at nothing hollow. Daniel opened his laptop and began the first lines of a memo to all Aurora Air employees. Fairness does not begin with policy. It begins with the gaze today. I saw how much that gaze can wound from this moment on. Aurora Air will change, not only in how we fly, but in how we treat one another. He paused, looked down the row of seats, and let his voice travel softly to ladies and gentlemen. We are about to take off, and from now on I hope we relearn how to fly with dignity. No one answered yet in those downcast eyes. Something was stirring, shame, awareness, and perhaps the beginnings of awakening. Outside the sky opened wide and black, and inside the cabin, Daniel Carter's silence had become the most expensive lesson Aurora Air had ever received. 2 hours later, Aurora Air Flight AU219 quietly emerged from turbulence. Outside, the sky stretched black and smooth like silk, with only the silver moonlight brushing the wings in a cold reflection. Inside the first-class cabin, silence lingered like an invisible verdict. There was no more polite laughter, no more clinking glasses, only shallow breaths, hesitant and uneasy, and the averted gazes of those who had witnessed everything but chosen to stay silent. Daniel Carter sat upright, the glow of his laptop casting a steel blue light across his face. His fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, each keystroke sharp and deliberate, writing an email that felt less like words and more like the edge of a blade, not to retaliate, but to restore justice. From Daniel Carter. To Marcus Collins, General Counsel, Human Resources, Internal Communications. Subject Incident, AU219, Disciplinary Process and Transparent Communication. He typed slowly, his words clear and precise, as if they were meant not only to record, but to be carved into the company's history. I am instructing the legal department to finalize termination documents for Captain Thomas Avery and flight attendants Lauren Pierce and Mike Dalton. At the same time, I am mandating the immediate public implementation of the zero discrimination policy across the entire system. The communications team must prepare an open and transparent statement regarding this incident. No concealment, no softening. We will face this with the truth. Aurora Air does not need polished apologies, we need change. He pressed send. The small ping echoed softly, yet seemed to reverberate inside his mind. The process had begun, a process he had once designed himself, now being used to cleanse his own creation. From Seat 3, see Emily Park, a middle-aged Korean woman traveling to visit her daughter in San Francisco, watched him. She had seen everything from start to finish: his composure, their arrogance, and the moment the truth turned everything upside down. All that time she had stayed silent, not because she agreed, but because she was afraid. She had convinced herself that it wasn't her place. But now, watching Daniel's calm yet resolute shame rose in her chest. Emily drew a deep breath and stood up. Every head lifted instantly, as though any movement now was a rebellion against their collective silence. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, her voice trembling, but clear enough for everyone to hear, "I want to apologize. I saw everything from the beginning. I knew what was happening was wrong, but I didn't say a word. I was afraid of making trouble. And now I realize my silence was the real trouble." The cabin fell utterly still. Cynthia Harper clutched her handbag, tears sliding down her face. Peter Langford stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Daniel looked up, his expression softening. He nodded. "Thank you, Miss Park. I appreciate that. But you know," he paused, his voice lowering, heavy with meaning, "the time to say what's right isn't after it's over. It's when someone is being humiliated right in front of us." His words were quiet, but they pierced every heart in that cabin. Behind the service curtain, Lauren wept softly. Mike stood beside her, lips pressed tight, face pale and shaken. Daniel tilted his head slightly, his voice carrying across the aisle calm, and measured each word like a vow. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened today isn't just an incident. It's a reminder that we live in a world where silence can kill justice. I'm not using power for revenge. I'm using it to protect those who don't have the chance to protect themselves." A wave of emotion rippled through the cabin. The air that had been thick with fear now thinned, replaced by something new: awareness. Daniel stood stepping into the narrow aisle. His voice was deep, steady, and deliberate. I don't want anyone on this flight to remember me as an angry CEO. I want you to remember this day as a lesson that respect isn't a privilege of class. It's the foundation of dignity. His eyes moved slowly from face to face, some filled with shame, some with tears, some still unable to look up. And one more thing, he continued, every person has power. Some have authority, others only a voice. But never underestimate that voice, because sometimes one person standing up is enough to change an entire flight. Emily Park began to cry, openly nodding as her trembling hand pressed against her heart. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "I won't be silent again." Daniel gave her a small, gentle smile, and that he said softly is how the world begins to change. A chime sounded. The seatbelt light turned on. Captain Avery's voice came over the intercom, hoarse and unsteady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent. We apologize for the earlier inconvenience." His tone was shaky, unsure, like a man who no longer trusted his own authority. Daniel said nothing. He turned to the window where the lights of San Francisco flickered beneath the clouds. In that quiet moment, he thought of his father, the man once turned away from a job interview because he didn't fit the company culture. He thought of countless others, people of color, dismissed, sidelined, or treated as exceptions to be verified. He whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "No one should ever have to endure that again. Not on a plane, not anywhere." The plane touched down. As the cabin doors opened, warm light from the terminal spilled inside, bright and cleansing, like a kind of redemption. Daniel stood adjusting his jacket. He turned back to first class, his gaze gentler now. "I know today has been unforgettable for all of us. But if there's anything worth remembering, let it be this: justice doesn't need noise or spectacle. It only needs to be seen." No one replied, but the eyes that followed him were different, no longer contemptuous, not merely fearful, but filled with remorse and a fragile seed of respect. Daniel stepped off the plane. The last light of day washed over his shoulders, illuminating his calm face. Every step he took away from AU 219 severed a piece of the past and opened a new chapter, one of transparency, dignity, and courage. Behind him, no one yet realized that the plane's security cameras had captured everything in full detail, and in just a few hours that truth would take flight once more, not across the sky but across the world. 6 hours after Aurora Air Flight, AU 219 landed in San Francisco. The world was no longer quiet. The storm began with a video, not from a passenger, but from the airline's own security cameras. A 27-minute footage was released on Aurora Air's official website, unedited, uncut. At the very top of the description, there was only one sentence: "Justice doesn't need an explanation, it only needs to be seen." The screen opened. Viewers saw the moment Cynthia Harper insisted on sitting in seat 2, saw Lauren Pierce inspecting Daniel's credit card as if she were interrogating him, saw Captain Thomas Avery coldly ordering the passenger to leave the plane. And then everything changed. The instant Olivia Bennett's voice came through the phone. "Captain Avery, do you know who you're speaking to?" What followed was a chain reaction. The internet exploded. Hashtags like "Justice," "At 30 feet, fly with dignity," and "Seat 2A" flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Within 3 hours, the video had surpassed 50 million views. In 7 hours, it appeared on the front pages of CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times. Aurora Air's communications department had already been prepared under Daniel's direction. The official statement went live alongside the footage with a tone that was neither defensive nor evasive, and without blaming any system error. It read, "We will not hide from the truth. We apologize for what occurred on Flight AU 219. 3 employees involved have been terminated. 2 passengers with discriminatory behavior have been suspended from flying privileges. Aurora Air will become the first airline to implement a real-time discrimination response system. We believe fairness does not begin with apologies, it begins with action. Short, direct, cold, but it landed like a punch that shattered silence." Meanwhile, international media rushed to comment. CNN's headline read, "A CEO discriminated against on his own flight, and how he turned humiliation into a wave of reform." The Washington Post published an editorial. Daniel Carter didn't just reclaim dignity for himself, but for everyone who has ever been forced into silence. Across the internet, reaction videos, podcasts, and talk shows multiplied overnight. A veteran journalist remarked, "For the first time, a company hasn't hidden its scandal, but released it itself. This isn't PR, it's a declaration." At Aurora Air's New York headquarters, the office windows reflected dozens of cameras and microphones, all aimed at one man, Daniel Carter. He stepped outside without a PR team, without bodyguards, without the armor of power, just a simple gray suit and the calm gaze of someone walking into an ordinary meeting. Mr. Carter reporters shouted from every direction. "Do you regret releasing the video? Are you worried about the stock dropping? Did you do this to save your personal image?" Daniel stopped on the steps. He lifted his head, meeting the glare of cameras. His voice carried clearly no microphone needed. "I have no regrets. I didn't do it to protect my image. I did it because there are millions of people who will never have the chance to say what I can say." He paused for a heartbeat. The camera flashes flared, reflecting a quiet, powerful light in his eyes. "My company lost nothing except the prejudice that had already rotted. What we gained was trust, and there's no stock more valuable than trust." Applause broke out, not from the reporters, but from a group of Aurora Air employees gathered in the lobby. People who had sat silent in meetings before now wept openly. One woman whispered, "For the first time, I'm proud to work here." As media chaos continued, consequences unfolded elsewhere. Cynthia Harper lost her Elite Diamond membership entirely. She called customer service, sent emails, even hired a lawyer, but every response came back, the same, cold and final. "The decision is irreversible." She appeared on a local news program, crying, saying, "I apologized. I just didn't know who he was." The clip was immediately edited and spread online with the caption, "Sorry because he was the CEO, not because you were wrong." Thousands of comments poured in, angry, scornful, and pitying all at once. Cynthia shut down her accounts. Lauren Pierce and Mike Dalton, the 2 dismissed flight attendants, attempted to share their version on a morning talk show. But when the host played the original footage on screen, their defense collapsed live on air. Lauren broke down in tears, and Mike bowed his head, speechless. Thomas Avery, the captain, who had flown for 40 years, received a permanent suspension notice from the Pilots Association. Sitting in his small house in Houston, he stared at an old photo of his crew, his eyes empty. A man who had guided hundreds of flights finally understood sometimes what brings a plane down isn't mechanical failure, but human prejudice. In contrast to those losses, Aurora Air began to rise. In the first week after the incident, the company's stock rose 12%. Investors called it the trust effect. Passengers started sharing images of black travelers, disabled passengers, and women being treated with genuine courtesy on Aurora Air flights. All of it stemmed from a single decision: the courage to let the world see the truth. Daniel received thousands of emails and handwritten letters. One of them came from a 12-year-old girl in Detroit, written carefully in pencil. "Dear Mr. Daniel, my mum showed me the video. I don't understand everything adults do, but I know when someone is treated unfairly, they need someone brave to speak up. Thank you for speaking. When I grow up, I want to be strong like you." The letter was framed and placed on his desk. Late at night, the 72nd floor office of Aurora Air glowed softly against the city lights. Daniel stood by the glass window, looking down at the illuminated streets. Behind him, the computer screen flickered with incoming messages: enrollment for diversity and human dignity training record. Sign up 17,000 employees. He smiled faintly. It was not a smile of victory, but the quiet smile of a man who had witnessed justice truly take flight. The night sky reflected in his eyes, deep calm, filled with countless points of light. Each one, he thought, represented a person who had just learned that truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be seen and believed. 3 months after the shocking incident on Flight AU-219, the name Aurora Air was no longer tied to scandal, but to a cultural revolution in the aviation industry. From New York to Tokyo, people spoke of it as proof that transparency can save an entire brand when guided by courage. In the 72nd floor boardroom, the soft morning light of May poured across the glass walls. Daniel Carter stood before his senior leadership team, the sunlight reflecting off the long conference table, making him appear both resolute and radiant, a man who had walked through a storm without losing his essence. On the screen behind him, large letters glowed: Aurora Air 2.0, fly with dignity. Daniel looked around the room, his voice calm, yet deep, carrying the weight of someone who had seen the dark side of his own creation. 3 months ago, we faced the worst moment in our company's history. But that moment taught us something no training manual ever could, that nothing changes until the human heart does. Today we're not talking about policies, we're talking about trust. Heads nodded around the room. Olivia Bennett, the director of operations, was the first to stand and speak. "Daniel, the Dignity Training Program has been rolled out in 32 countries, with more than 48,000 employees participating. The internal feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. And the real-time discrimination reporting system you ordered has already processed over 1,200 reports in its first month." Daniel smiled slightly. "Good. Because those numbers aren't just data. Each number is a person who felt respected." He turned to Marcus Collins, the General Counsel. "And how have our partners responded?" Marcus answered softly, but his eyes shone. "We just renewed a 10-year contract with SkyWest Alliance. They called Aurora Air the new moral standard of the industry." Applause broke out around the room. Daniel nodded, but did not smile. He looked out toward the distant sky, beyond the glass-white clouds, drifting lazily past. "We're flying higher," he said slowly. "But let's never forget why we take off. Fairness isn't a campaign. It's a lifelong commitment." That afternoon, Daniel met with Margaret Chen, the journalist who had written the first editorial defending him after the AU-219 incident. She arrived with a small recorder and a knowing smile. "You realize," she began, "since that day, there have been over 200 articles written about you. Hero, symbol, the brave CEO. But I want to ask, do you see yourself as a hero?" Daniel chuckled, his voice warm and grounded. "A hero, no. I'm just someone who was once forced to stand up. And when I did, I realized there were far too many people who couldn't." Margaret studied him, her eyes soft with understanding. "But you did create real change. Daniel nodded gently. Change only matters if it doesn't end with me. If another flight attendant finds the courage to say, "This is wrong," or if another passenger stands up for a stranger, then that's what I'd call victory. Margaret turned off her recorder, her tone easing. You know she said that little girl from Detroit, the one who wrote you the letter she's gone viral. The video of her reading it aloud has over 7 million views. Daniel smiled. Destiny Harris. Right, I still keep her letter on my desk. It reminds me that every action, no matter how small, leaves a mark. That evening, the Grand Hall of the Los Angeles International Convention Center glowed with lights. Daniel had been invited to speak at the Global Forum on Corporate Justice, a gathering of leaders, scholars, and advocates from around the world. He walked onto the stage to a long round of applause. Behind him, the massive LED screen played a slow-motion clip from Flight AU219, the moment he told the cabin, "Justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be seen." The audience fell silent. Daniel stood beneath the lights, his voice deep and resonant, speaking straight from the heart. I once took a flight where I learned that dignity can be stripped away through suspicion, through bias, through silence. But I also learned the strength of responding, not with anger, but with truth. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. When truth takes flight, no one can bring it down. We don't need greater CEOs. We need human beings who can say enough when they see what's wrong. The applause erupted again, thunderous and lasting so long that the host had to wait nearly a full minute before continuing. Daniel bowed his head in gratitude, his eyes gleaming with conviction. In that moment, he was no longer the man humiliated in first class. He was a symbol of a new era, one where power is used not to suppress, but to uplift. After the speech backstage, Olivia Bennett was waiting for him. She smiled. You know, they just asked permission to use your speech as case material at Harvard Business School. They're calling it the Carter Principle. Daniel laughed softly. That sounds too grand. I just did what anyone should do. Exactly, Olivia replied. And that's why it matters. She handed him a small envelope. This is for you. Not from the press, from that little girl, Destiny. Daniel opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn postcard, a plane soaring across a sky full of stars. At the bottom, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Dear Mr. Daniel, next time you fly, remember there are people on the ground who look up and still believe the sky is fair." He went still, his lips pressed together. A single tear slipped down his finger, not from sadness, but from realizing his journey had grown far beyond a single flight. Late that night, Daniel sat alone in his office, the city lights reflecting on the glass like thousands of stars. He gazed out at the sky where Aurora airplanes glided silently into the distance, metal birds carrying a quiet reminder that the world can still be better if people are brave enough to change it. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "No one can rewrite the past, but we can teach the future how to fly in the right direction." And at the altitude where justice was once tested, Aurora Air now soared, not powered by engines alone, but by the belief that human dignity is the one ticket that can never be downgraded. A clear morning dawned over New York, and the Aurora Air headquarters reflected the first sunlight of the day like a giant mirror against the sky. People moved briskly in and out of the building, but on the 72nd floor, where the glass walls still held the reflection of one man, time seemed to move a little slower. Daniel Carter stood there, hands in his pockets, gazing toward the horizon. From above, he could see the company's airplanes, each bearing the winged logo, lifting off one after another, leaving trails of white across the blue sky. Each flight was a promise proof that Aurora Air was flying, not only on engines, but on the trust that had been rebuilt. 3 months had passed since the Los Angeles Forum, yet the echo of Flight AU219 still lingered, spreading beyond the boundaries of an industry. People had begun calling it the Carter Effect. On television, news anchors still spoke his name. A morning broadcast opened with the host's voice. In just 6 months, Aurora Air has achieved a record growth of 19%. But what surprises experts is not the number. It's how they achieved it through ethics. In the press room of the United Nations, a delegate from South Africa declared, "We have adopted the Aurora policy for our national airline, based on the fairness and transparency model pioneered by Daniel Carter." At Harvard, business students studied the Carter Principle, which taught that when power is used to protect human dignity, business becomes a symbol of civilization. Daniel knew all of this, but he didn't dwell on reputation because he understood that fame is only the echo of action. What mattered to him was whether the lesson had truly reached people's hearts. That afternoon, he received a call from Olivia Bennett. "Dan, someone's waiting for you downstairs. Her name's Destiny Harris." Daniel smiled. "Send her up." A few minutes later, the door opened. A 12-year-old girl from Detroit, the one whose letter had touched millions, stepped in holding a paper airplane in her hand, her eyes bright like stars. "Hello, Mr. Daniel." Destiny said softly but confidently, "I'm sorry for coming without telling you first. I just wanted to tell you this. I want to be a pilot." Daniel laughed gently, the sound warm and touched with emotion. "Really, why a pilot?" "Because I want to fly in a sky where people aren't judged," she said. "Where I can take everyone to where they belong, not to where they're labeled." Her words left Daniel momentarily speechless. He knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "You know, there were times I thought the world would never change. But then I realized as long as there's one person who dreams like you, hope still lives." Destiny smiled and placed the paper airplane on his desk. "I want you to keep it," she said, "to remember that you made me believe in the sky." Daniel nodded. "I promise I will." She walked out, leaving behind a strange glow, the kind of light that can only come from a child's belief in a better world. That evening, Daniel sat alone in his office. He opened the old footage from Flight AU219 for the first time since it was made public. The scene appeared on the screen, the cold stares, the cutting words, his own voice, revealing who he truly was. He didn't watch to relive the humiliation, but to see how far the journey had come from darkness into light. He paused at the frame where Cynthia Harper bowed her head, tears falling onto the cabin floor. Back then he hadn't known that the same woman, after her suspension, had quietly sent a handwritten letter to Aurora Air. "Mr. Carter, I thought I understood the world. But that day I realized I only understood the convenient part of it. Thank you for not raising your voice. Your silence made me hear my conscience louder. I'm taking a course on bias awareness now. And if possible, I would like to begin again as a student." Daniel read the letter again, his heart softening, not out of pity, but from the realization that real change doesn't come from speeches. It begins when someone dares to look within. He folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer next to Destiny's paper airplane. Two symbols, one of a mistake, one of hope, lying side by side, like twin wings of the same journey. The next morning, he and his leadership team attended the opening of the new Aurora Institute for Ethical Leadership. Behind the stage hung a large banner that read, "No one is born fair, but everyone can learn to be kind." Daniel stepped up to the podium, the lights reflecting in his eyes. He spoke slowly, each word landing with the weight of conviction. Fairness is not the responsibility of governments or courts. It belongs to every individual, every glance, every question, every small act in a day. If we don't confront the prejudice within ourselves, then no number of policies will matter. The room was completely silent. He continued, "I don't want Aurora Air to be known only for handling a scandal well. I want our name to be synonymous with respect. Because only through respect can people truly rise, not just in the sky, but in dignity." The applause that followed was not loud, but steady deep, like the heartbeat of faith coming alive again. That night on his way home, Daniel walked along the avenue as the wind from the Hudson River swept through, carrying the chill of salt and rain. He looked up at the sky. An Aurora airplane glided across its blinking lights, tracing through the dark like falling stars. He thought to himself, perhaps justice is like an airplane. It only overcomes the gravity of prejudice when it has enough thrust and enough belief. His phone buzzed. A message from Olivia read, "CNN wants you on the show, Leaders Who Changed Culture. Are you interested?" Daniel looked at the screen and typed back, "No need. Let others tell the rest of the story. I was only the beginning." He put the phone away and smiled. The wind kept blowing, the sky stayed open, and the world, though slow, was changing. Somewhere a young girl was dreaming of the day she would pilot her first Aurora Air flight. And here, the man who was once humiliated in first class now understood that some journeys never land because they take off inside the human heart. One October afternoon, the San Francisco sky glowed with the color of honey. The Aurora airplanes glided across the horizon like soft brush strokes, redrawing the meaning of the word justice with their very flight paths. Inside the newly opened training center of the Aurora Institute, the first class of the day ended with a long round of applause. The instructor was Lauren Pierce, the former chief flight attendant, who had once sparked outrage around the world. She stood before the board, her voice gentle but firm. "The day I was fired, I thought my life was over. But the very CEO I once doubted invited me back not to fly, but to teach others not to repeat my mistakes." The classroom fell silent. Lauren paused, taking a deep breath. "I've learned that sometimes justice isn't punishment. It's the chance for people to wake up." After class, she stepped into the hallway where Daniel Carter was waiting. Lauren bowed her head slightly. "Thank you for believing that I could still do the right thing." Daniel smiled, his tone calm and warm. "I don't believe in perfection, Lauren. I believe in the ability to make things right." They looked through the glass wall. Outside, young trainees were laughing and walking arm in arm. In their hands were notebooks printed with the Aurora logo, their covers reading, "Respect is not a privilege, it's where we begin." Somewhere else, Cynthia Harper, the woman who once took seat 2A, quietly volunteered for an organization that supported immigrants. That afternoon, she gently helped an elderly Haitian woman fill out a job application. When the woman asked why a former executive would sit there doing this, Cynthia smiled softly. "Because once I sat in a seat that wasn't mine." Now I want to help others find theirs. That simple sentence spread quietly through the community, not as a headline, not with noise or fame, but with truth, the kind of truth that makes people believe that sometimes change begins with a crack in pride. Night fell. Daniel stood alone on the balcony of his office, the stars shimmering across the surface of the bay. Olivia Bennet approached, holding a cup of coffee. "Did you ever think," she asked, "that a single seat, 2A, could change the whole world?" Daniel smiled faintly. It wasn't the seat, he said. It was the people who sat in it, and how they treated each other. Olivia looked at him, her expression soft. "Aurora is preparing to open a new route to Johannesburg. The flight code will be AU219. Daniel lifted his gaze, his eyes gleaming in the dark. "AU219, he repeated. "Good. That's where every new journey begins." The ocean breeze swept past them, carrying the salt of the sea. Daniel closed his eyes, letting his mind drift back to that moment years ago when he had been forced to stand in first class under the weight of suspicion. Now the world was different. Not perfect, but learning to be better each day. He spoke softly, like a message carried by the wind. No flight path is safe forever. But as long as we keep the light within us, every journey will reach where it's meant to go. Across the sky, an aurora plane glided by, leaving behind a thin trail like a signature. A journey that began in injustice and ended in awakening. 7 months after the fateful flight, AU219. Aurora Air held the Dignity Flight Anniversary ceremony at its New York headquarters. Hundreds of employees from around the world flew in, technicians, flight attendants, and even the night shift janitors, all wearing new uniforms embroidered with silver wings and the words, "Fly with Dignity." In the Grand Hall, a large portrait of Daniel Carter hung beside his now famous quote, "There is no neutral ground in human dignity." When he stepped onto the stage, the lights dimmed, leaving only a single beam shining on the man who had changed the entire aviation industry with one decision, the decision to face the truth. Daniel began with a soft smile. Less than a year ago, Aurora Air was a name the world spoke with outrage. Today, that same world flies with us, not because of luxury, but because we choose to treat people with respect. Applause erupted loud and unending, echoing through the hall. He waited for silence, then continued, his voice steady, deep and warm. "But we cannot afford to become complacent. Fairness is not a destination, it's a journey. And if we ever stop moving, old prejudices will take flight again." Below the stage, Olivia Bennet smiled quietly, while Lauren Pierce, now the lead instructor at the Aurora Institute, looked up at him with pride. Once they had stood on opposite sides of a painful story. Now they shared the same dream. When the ceremony ended, Daniel stepped out onto the balcony, where the early spring breeze carried a cool gentleness. The city below sparkled like a sea of stars. Behind him, laughter and conversation drifted from the hall, the voices of people who had once been afraid, now rediscovering their faith in one another. His phone buzzed a message from Destiny Harris. "Mr. Daniel, I got accepted into flight school. One day, I'll be the one flying a plane with the Aurora logo. I promise I'll fly with my heart." Daniel read the message again and again, a quiet smile spreading across his face, his eyes glimmering with pride and peace. He lifted his gaze to the night sky, where an Aurora plane was taking off its golden lights, cutting through the clouds. He whispered softly to himself, or perhaps to the world, "This sky doesn't belong to any color, any class. It belongs to those who dare to keep the light in their hearts. The wind carried his words into the vastness of the night, and somewhere above the clouds, a future pilot might be dreaming of a sky without borders. Daniel turned and walked slowly back into the hall, where the lights still glowed, where voices still rose, and where the story of a single first-class seat had become a symbol of justice, courage, and human dignity. One seat, one man, one moment. That was all it took to shake the sky. From the perspective of an expert in ethical leadership and corporate culture, Daniel Carter's journey is not merely the story of a flight, but a test of how people choose to use power to exclude or to enlighten. He not only proved that justice can exist in the skies, but also reminded us that dignity does not lie in the class of a seat, but in how we treat one another when no one is watching. Because no matter how high we fly, respect remains the only anchor that keeps our humanity intact. If you believe the world needs more people who use their strength to protect rather than to diminish, then like this video to spread that message. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories where compassion is tested by power, and comment below with a phrase that expresses your belief in this value that can never be stolen. Keep your dignity.